Our brains prefer to interact with things that are physical in the world. We feel more comfortable when we're touching things. There's agency that we gain. And so my initial starting point is always around how can we use sort of real world physical affordances to unlock the digital power that we have at our disposal now? You know, is it rolling it? Is it pushing something? Is it stroking something? What material could I use that would evoke a different type of interaction? And that's really that starting very, formal approach, looking at the actual material itself.
That was Orlando's Mathias. He is a truly hands-on designer, traversing the full breadth of product innovation from strategy through to the nitty-gritty of design and prototyping. He has led product innovation projects with Meta, Samsung Design Studio, and worked alongside Google's team on their gestural technology. He has now founded The Blend, a design firm championing a physical-first approach, helping organizations anticipate and design our blended future. In this conversation, we will discover what is his ideation and design process.
I'm a designer, not an engineer. My background is more in the arts, but I still very much do start with sketching, thinking about, on a more formal approach to AR, I'm trying to understand the interaction paradigms that are available to us now.
He's experienced with Snap spectacles.
So I was given a pair of glasses by Snap. What's really lovely about LED Studio, the level of output is so close. It's a prototype, but it's so close to being a published actual product.
What are the lessons he learned from working with those who understand the physical space much better than digital designers?
As digital designers, we can only really bring so much. This world, should be owned and sort of, taken forward by industrial designers and architects. They already understand the spatial world. So I worked with them to understand
how to avoid the biggest mistake you can make when designing spatial interaction and interfaces.
This amazing Figma, it traps you into that mobile-centric sort of approach to UI. The reason I say physical first is because it's unlearning what we know about sort of UX now.
And what he learned from leading teams during high-stake design projects.
You've got board members in the room. They want to understand, well, what is this? So it's very focused on what the relevance is to them. But I also encourage and make sure that at the beginning of these exercises, that there is a big explanation of their brand and their values.
And now it's time to roll the title and welcome Mathias under the spotlight. Orlando, it is a real pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to this.
So, Orlando, I have seen, and we got in contact because I've seen some incredible concept and prototypes that you have shared. And I was curious to understand, what's your process when designing for these blended realities?
Well, my approach always starts, and I use this term now, sort of physical first. After working, a long time in this industry, desperate to sort of remove ourselves from the interaction that we're sort of so used to trained to around this sort of abstract layer of a mouse and a touchscreen, we suddenly can touch things and feel things again. And so my objective is really, how can we harness that as much as possible? And AR technology is finally allowing us to sort of step up, look at the world and touch the world again. And so my initial starting point is always around how can we use sort of real world physical affordances to unlock the digital power that we have at our disposal now.
And so being that the mission, right? So this is kind of like uncharted territory, right? Let's be honest in a way, because we are still struggling and looking at how to design for augmented reality and virtual reality, especially for headset based, right? And we have these two realities, literally, like the physical objects and these digital elements that needs to blend together. Can you tell us a little bit about the tooling or the process of coming up with ideas?
Sure. There's a number of different ways, but primarily I'm a designer, not an engineer. My background is more in the arts. And so my mind works in a very free-flowing way, not very systematic. And so I'm always looking for opportunities and ways to feel almost like I'm sketching, so that you're as thoughts are coming, you're able to translate them quickly. But obviously in this paradigm of AR technology, it's very sophisticated and very complex. And, it's quite hard to harness and get your hands around. But I still very much do start with sketching, thinking about on a more, I guess, formal approach to AR. I'm trying to understand the interaction paradigms that are available to us now. And so it's not so much about there's a big problem to solve right now, or we need to sort of create this particular product or service. It's more around how can we think about engaging with the real world again. So that's sort of the challenge I have in my head. And then I start to think about real world interactions. And so I start sketching. I literally, are drawing objects, shapes that I think encourage a different type of physical affordance. Is it rolling it? Is it pushing something? Is it stroking something? What material could I use that would evoke a different type of interaction? And that's really that starting very, formal approach, looking at the actual material itself. And then obviously because it's 3D and it's, in our spatial environment, you have to move very quickly into actually working in a sort of 3-dimensional space. So I use tools. I mean, Spline has come along, which is just amazing. It's really sort of nailed that, full features, really good fidelity, enough to be able to prototype and share with people, but very fast, and in order to be able to deliver sort of, animation and interaction. So I move quickly between, drawn sketching on, Procreate or so forth into something like Spline or Blender if I want to get a little bit more detailed on that. But I'm not an expert in, 3D, so I'd rather sort of just stay, how can I quickly get something made? And then, I can talk, go on about, now using Lens Studio has just then suddenly taken it even further. So I was given a pair of glasses by Snap, and that pushed me then into saying, well, okay, I can have animations which can show so much and they could be interactive. But suddenly now having that power to say, well, okay, I used to code back in the day. I now can, I understand how to code. And so I've been able to sort of ramp that up. And obviously we've got Gen AI as our little helper now. So it takes you even further. And what's really lovely about Lens Studio, I mean, there is a learning curve and there's, it's a tough sort of battle to get through, but, surprisingly fast. The level of output with the glasses, and then obviously using it in companion with the phone AR, you've got something that is so close. It's a prototype, but it's so close to being a published actual product, and so from that process of sketching 3D animations into an actual prototype that you can put things on, and it's there now. We can do that. Mind to output is there.
I have a follow-up questions because it sounds like you don't do much of physical prototyping. I'm not sure if that's something that you don't do, in a sense that from a sketch that is a 2D to a screen that is still in a way 2D. I was wondering if throughout the process, do you ever actually play with Lego blocks or with cutouts or with cardboard?
Oh yeah, no, that's good. No, I'm glad you said that. I did forget. No, I do. Not so much with Lego. So I have my house is, my room is full of objects that I've made, and so I worked with a company called Approach Studios, who are an industrial design firm. So when I first started to have these thoughts, I went on a sort of tour of architects and industrial designers, talking to them about this technology, because really, as digital designers, we can only really bring so much. This world is really, should be owned and sort of, taken forward by industrial designers and architects. They already understand the spatial world. They're already putting things into that space. So I was very aware that I need that input. So I worked with them to understand, to play around with different forms, use 3D printing to create different objects. So I sit there a lot with objects, rolling them around, imagining it, thinking of a particular form of interaction or a particular output that I want, and then start to sort of think about the interaction or the object that it is.
So I can imagine that while you start ideating, when you talk to people, there is all sorts of stuff that come out, right? All sorts of things that could, let's say, affordances that could be augmented in a way by digital content, right? So what are some of the things that you focused on and you feel like felt particularly good, and why?
Yeah, I mean, it's what I'm finding right now, I think, is that I certainly don't have the answers, but what I've started to do is it's unlocking that, I guess, conversation or awareness around it. I think that's my motivation, is that it's very hard to find a solution, but I'm building a sort of set of tools, I guess, that allow you to explore and manipulate and play with real objects to then find what are those types of interactions that are right. And there's really simple things that, I think one of the last ones I did was just thinking about a lid and going, well, okay, you naturally put things away and you open things up. And, we all know that technology is, bombarding our lives. If you can physically put something and close it away, put that on a shelf, that is out of your mind. And there's a nice metaphor to that, but there's also a practical element to that. And I open that up when I want to, or I assign particular notifications to that object, and I decide when I want it to talk to me or not. So there's those sort of nice little metaphor, physical interactions, as well as the sort of touching and stroking and turning things over, but trying to be as physical as possible, really. I don't know if that answers the thing.
Absolutely. No, I think it makes sense. The example of the lid, it's 100% there, right? It's like you open it, something pops up, you close it, and that's closed. It's done, right? When I can imagine how, for example, flipping or rolling, that could become something different, because, like, to what kind of like physical metaphor do you associate that, right? It's more like a feature or a function in a way.
Yeah. Although I started to, one of the things, I sort of begun to do once I've moved past purely the formal side of things. Well, like, okay, what are the key things that I'm constantly referring to my phone to do? And if you have kids, it's like, where are they? Sending them money, a quick message to them, and so forth. And these are things that you're constantly diving into your phone to do. And obviously you get lost in your phone, and the whole sort of distraction loop happens at that point. So if I'm in and I'm mainly looking at in home, it's not a sort of mobile outdoor thing. It's like, the distraction that you have when you're sitting in your living room or when you're sitting around the dining table. If you can assign different sorts of rituals that you have on your phone to an object, then you've isolated those and you've put them on that object. So just turning a block to face one side allows me to see where my daughter is, or turning it to the other side and swiping it, I can send her £5, for instance. So it's just those little ways that you can just do something, carry on with what you're doing. You're not going into your phone, you're just interacting with something that's in your space.
So there is a lot to cover, but one question that kind of like come up when you said this is like, what do I do with my phone? Now, the point is that what I do with my phone is different from what you do with your phone. It's different from people 10 years from now, because it's kind of like time frames are going to do with their phones. So maybe just high level, for what users how have you taken the user into account? Like, for what kind of task or ideas, for who are you designing with? For you, are you designing for?
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult right now because obviously we're unable to do the level of testing and feedback that you do with mobile. We have thousands of people that we can put things out to and get feedback. We can do qualitative and quantitative testing, and that's what I do, generally day to day. With this, we don't have that scale, so it's very difficult to get that sort of feedback. So there's a lot of assumptions that we have to make in order to sort of anticipate, I guess, how these things are going to be used. And because I'm not necessarily looking at gaming or entertainment, I'm looking at utility, day-to-day use. It's quite a tough challenge because people aren't wearing glasses in that way. Certainly, it's not proliferated in that way. So I'm having to make assumptions, but I have a strong belief, and I'm all in with AR because I really, and I think the world does understand the frustrations around the phone, and so we know that our our brains prefer to interact with things that are physical in the world. We feel more comfortable when we're touching things. There's agency that we gain by touching something and, manipulating it in a physical form. And we get comfort from that as well, from organic materials, which we lose immediately when we have this numb, I call senseless interaction. Yeah. And we've put an abstract layer between our now every service that we have. It's this, either we're using this mouse, which is detached, or we have this abstract, piece of glass. So I love the homunculus man. Do you know the homunculus man? It's like a character. No? I don't know where it originally came from, but it's a sort of caricature of a human being with all their senses exaggerated. So the tongue is huge, the lips are huge, the nose is huge, and the fingers. And it's a great thing because when you look at that, you think, well, look, we've got all of these senses. The brain is wanting to access all of this, and we're reducing this down to this simple sort of horrible sort of 2D thing. So I'm hanging on that belief that our engagement technologies are just not going away. What we need to now understand, and we know that there are problems with the phone. So what are the things that we can do in order to interact with this technology? And obviously AI is well, I'm sorry, I'm going on, but
no, I think AI is another important topic because that is also unlocking a completely different way of interacting with our space, as well as AI understanding what the users want. But there was another point that before we dive into maybe more software side of things and maybe spectacles as well, that is another interesting point. You brought up this fact about material. Right. And it's not just about materials, right? It's the shape, is the weight. Sometimes it's even the temperature, the texture. So there is so much going on. Like, I mean, what have you learned about it? And what advice would you give to people that are trying to blend these two mediums and having this so important aspect that is the physical world from which we have been learning since we were born?
Yeah. I mean, it's just, well, the reason I say physical first is because it's unlearning what we know about sort of UX now. And I don't have big words of wisdom. It's just the real, and when I work with people, different designers or different companies, I really, get them to put their mindset back in that. So it's avoiding any form of 2D UI language unless you absolutely have to. So, if a material is ribbed, for instance, if it's got, like a sort of texture to it, you start to think about that as a form of interaction. It creates friction. It slows you down. Could that surface suddenly, as you're rolling your finger off, actually evoke a type of digital reaction to that? So, it's almost anti the approach that you take when you're, a good product designer solving problems, because what you're doing is you get a problem, you're trying to find the solution for it. But I think we're too quick in this space to start to put standards in for XR. It's just too early. We've got this lovely sense of freedom right now in many ways. It's the Wild West. We know that this is happening. This is coming down the line. And, we don't quite yet know when it's going to become, mass market. But let's enjoy and indulge in that opportunity, because it's very rare to know what's coming and have some technologies that you can start exploring without that pressure of scaling it, mass market, the commercialization of it. So it's this fast adoption of going, okay, let's start to put some abstract interactions. We need to do gestures. We need to do pictures. We need to do slides. This is the way we do it. It's just, let's start to really open that out much more and look at the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And one question is maybe like to follow up on that. What do you think is the space for that? In the sense that, like, within organization, are those individual small design agency, or are those people that maybe like big organization that have just designing physical products and are experimenting on top of it? Is Meta or Google a better place for that? Right. So what do you think is the ideal space, given also your experience in working with big teams, right? For allowing and start experimenting and allow us to be joyful and, say, explorative about this technology?
Well, I'm joyful a lot because I think this is an opportunity of being joyful again with the way we interact. I mean, it's really hard right now. I mean, it's hard for me because, and all sort of independent people in this space. And I was talking to Snap about this the other day because, the clients aren't necessarily needing this right now. And so, they've got lots of other things going on that they need to focus on. And so, I work with in two different ways, I think, with clients. One, which is, how is this technology going to affect my business? How is it going to change my products and services and how I engage with my customers? Or it's startups that are developing technologies and they want to understand what are the real world use cases? How do I make prototypes that can actually communicate what I'm doing, either to sort of VCs or to the public? And so, and the learning curve is quite steep for designers that are outside of this sort of XR space. And so for investment for businesses or for individuals to scale up their capability without necessarily that return of investment in the short term is the sort of conundrum that we're all in. And I know that, Snap, Meta and everybody are really trying hard to make tools that are accessible, and ShapeXR is one, obviously, that's, doing a great job. But I think there's still a long way to go to really make that really accessible, because it's not going to have that moment that everyone wants until a much broader design community can get their hands around this and then start exploring it. It can't just be engineers and digital designers doing it.
So, I mean, undoubtedly, so there is certainly a tooling problem. That is for sure. And maybe before we get into that, like, what does it take to really start scaling this, or scaling this way of thinking as well? Yeah. One thing I want to understand, maybe, if I want to start experimenting with this, right? You mentioned Spectacles, you mentioned Lens Studio, you mentioned Spline, right? So what kind of, if I want to start experimenting with this, how could I start doing it, right? What is being, for example, your experience with Spectacles? How does it look like?
Well, to actually get the hardware is very difficult, isn't it? I mean, I was lucky enough to be given them. I don't think in the UK you're able to rent them in the same way as you are in the States. I think they're ramping that up, and I think the next generation will be. But what you find is that when you're developing on it, there's quite a lot of tools now for people to quickly get up and going with XR, and you can do it. And I flip between using like Snap lenses and the Spectacles as I'm developing, but the workflow is quite clunky. You're sort of putting on glasses, you wait for it to send across, and then you're trying it. So it is quite a clunky process. But I literally started from scratch with all of this, and it is it is that sort of way that if you don't want to get into the coding or the real XR, then 3D programs do allow you to have a lot of thinking around that type of interaction. For me, it's stay away from Figma and these 2D interfaces. If you're going to start designing for Spatial, start learning 3D in order to do that, or using those programs, because it's those, as amazing Figma is, and obviously I still use it, but it traps you into that mobile-centric sort of approach to UI, and it's breaking away from that and learning some of those things.
I just wanted to have a quick break to remind you that if you're enjoying this conversation, you should definitely check out the XR AI Spotlight newsletter. By subscribing, you will get weekly interviews like this one directly in your inbox. And by subscribing, you also get access to a list of tools and apps that allows you to experience conscious plotting in VR on Quest and Vision Pro. Just check the first link in the episode description. And now, let's get back to the show. One thing I also wanted to ask you, so you have mentioned this feeling of texture, of friction, for example, indicating a resistance slow you down, and then consequently like a scrolling for example, right? High level. Now, are there other things that, for example, you have discovered that are directly related to the physical object, being the material itself, right? Plastic, glass, or whatever that might be, or maybe the weight, or maybe the shapes. What are other things that you think might resonate well when bringing this physical interaction to the digital world?
Yeah, there's sort of two things. There's one on one side, which is I've been thinking around furniture, so how it's more of an adaptive, responsive, or anticipatory type of interface. So if I'm sitting on my armchair and I reach forward on my arm, the wooden armchair that's there, and there's music on, or there's the TV on, then that armchair is able to understand that and start to then form an interface under my hand at that point. So it's stemming from the type of surfaces that you have around the space. But what I wanted to say was around haptics. Is since I've been doing this, a number of different haptics companies have got in contact. And initially, so these are people that are either generating the response, so the vibrations and pulses, or they're understanding how we move our hands in order to interact in certain ways. And it's sort of ironic because in some ways I'm saying we don't need any of that. Let's touch the real world and get the real haptic feedback. But when I started working with them and talking to them, there's a company called Feather Lab that I'm just working with now. So they are able to understand, every finger, the pressure that you're putting on those. And then other companies are then creating it's almost like sequencing music. You do pulses and vibrations. So it's time, frequency, and there's another aspect to that. So you're stringing together a set of pulses and rhythms that you would like to have as a response. Now, when you really start to think about, you've got this ability, plus obviously the virtual content, and then obviously sound, spatial sound is a whole other thing. But I'm able to then have a piece of wood, for instance, a real piece of wood, and run my finger along that wood. But when it leaves the wood, and there's a digital or virtual element to that, I'm able to maintain that physical feedback when I'm touching the virtual element. So suddenly, I've started, most of my forms are around cavities in those forms. So it's voids within a form. So it could be an object with a dimple in it, or a curve, a piece of wood with a curve. So you're filling those forms with the virtual content. So it isn't something necessarily floating around. It's more about an extension of what that object originally was designed for. And that's where it becomes really exciting, because then you've got industrial design and digital designers really thinking together about, that context. I use a phrase, we can now design in the same context, in the same physical context as each other, the digital and the physical world. So it's just a magical time, really.
So when you are talking with these companies, right? And maybe this is like from a broader perspective, not necessarily about this physical digital interaction, physical first interactions, right? It can still be broader, but curious to hear about both. How do you help this organization? I mean, what's the process of getting them to start exploring them exploring this in a way that also add value to the company itself?
Last year I worked with a big telco, sort of telecommunications agency. So this was more of a traditional sort of, route, and they really wanted to understand how spatial technologies are going to affect their products and services. So I put a program together that was very much the usual, design thinking. So we did a deep dive into that technology. I really focused it on why it's relevant to them. Like, why are we having this conversation about, XR and these technologies? Because often it's very easy to throw a load of things about what you can do. When you've got board members in the room, they want to understand, well, what is this? Is this just a fun trend thing, or is this actually relevant? So it's very focused on what the relevance is to them. But I also encourage and make sure that when we design the beginning of these exercises, that there is a big explanation of their brand and their values, and also what's their short and long-term vision for the company. So what's their strategic vision and plan? Divorced of this, just understanding that, which then gives you a nice framework to then really be able to explore quite out there ideas with them. Once they've sort of understood the technology and broken it all down, which is part of that process. Because then when you're starting to form those propositions or concepts out of the sort of more free aspect of that area, they are landing in strategic areas that the company is looking at already. So if they're thinking of moving into TV or broadcast or something, some of the ideas would sit in that space. So when that then is being presented at a higher level, it becomes a lot more relevant. And then, what I found with that project was, even though the concepts were maybe three to 5 years out, there were some just interactive behaviors or actual new products themselves. They were able to immediately be fed into the design system that they were working on now, and even inform some of the product roadmap, because they were out there ideas, but they were inside what the company was sort of, their agenda anyway. So you have to find that balance really of being speculative, but in reality as well.
Exactly. And you said it, because so often, especially when we talk about VR, we think about this speculative thinking, and you think without sometimes no technological restrictions and no time frame restriction. And you see, it's not speculation, becomes more sci-fi. Yeah. Right. So how, maybe this is a great point you're making, right? What advice would you give to other people, other designers, or let's say senior leaders in the design space that are trying to facilitate this process and find this right balance between speculation and reality and a time frame? Are there some things that you have seen works better than others?
I don't know if I see it. I think the trick is moving into, and as I was saying earlier, because we can move quite quickly now into prototyping. With this technology, you just do not understand it until you've experienced it. It's very hard to really appreciate the value of it, I guess, or the impact that it can have. So vision videos are fantastic, and we need those to really show how things can be, and and mock-ups of how AR will be, and all of this great stuff. But to have something within those workshops or within that program that actually a C-suite can put some glasses on or a headset on and actually start to, and then they are game-changing moments, because it all sort of sinks in and the reality doesn't seem so far away. And then if you're coming up with ideas that are able to actually be made as a prototype, then that they're realistically possible in the near future, rather than being so, out there.
So is the solution to kind of like experiment early with something to get a feel for it? So is that the solution to trying to find the right balance between speculation and reality, is trying things fast and early?
Yeah, I think it always is. And with this technology, it's such a different way of thinking, a different way of interacting, that no matter what you think you're going to sort of have and what type of interaction it's going to be, until you're touching it and interacting with it, it throws everything up again. Where it used to be, well, it's obviously still is, but you put things in people's hands and they interact with it, and it's showing up loads of things you hadn't thought of. With this, it's for yourself. You just cannot unlock all the problems around it until you're actually interacting with something. And obviously, there's a lot of technical barriers that you have to sort of put aside and actually think about, well, what is this the right interaction for what we're trying to do?
You were mentioning about AI, right? And that is, of course, a very important piece of the puzzle, in a sense that, as I was saying, it allows us to understand the word. It allows us to understand how the user is behaving or where it is looking, and many more, right? And it will do even more. Yeah. So how do you think can designers play around with it? I mean, like, because then it really becomes, there are so many layers, right? So there is the physical layer, there is this digital layer, there is this AI layer, right? Yeah. So how have you, based on your experience so far and your experiments, how do you What have you learned?
Yeah. It's another great, I mean, we've got so many of these different tools to play with. It's a whole new palette, isn't it? I mean, it's crazy. And the thing with AI, apart from the helping you and the actual development side of it, which is, it's invaluable for these days, it's just part of the process. When we're thinking about, obviously now, XR and AI, and obviously we've got the Ray-Bans and frame glasses and things like that are coming to us first. As designers, what we need to think about is where does AI fit, and let's just say AR for now, because AR can obviously do a lot of things in the background. We don't need interfaces for them. We don't need to touch things and look at things, and a lot of stuff can be done in the background and setting things up. So then, where is the place then? What do we need? Why do we need AR? Then I was having a discussion with someone recently. What's the point of having all this sort of technology in your glasses that you can interact with and you create visual holograms with, when AI can just do it all for you? You can just talk to it. But there is always going to be a need for visual and interaction, and we are visual people, and there's only so much AI can do. And so it's, as a design in regards to interface and displaying content, you need obviously another layer to that. So I think it's, as designers, it's trying to understand that now. Where's the need for like visual interaction versus what can AI do in the background for you that actually can just surpass any of that? Because is it that as soon as you put a visual interface in, you're creating friction with the actual thing that you want to do, and AR can actually take a lot of that friction away for you? And so it's going to be this interesting balance of feeding that in and out of when it's necessary or not, I guess.
And I think the other point is also voice is public, right? So you can interact with an AI, but not everywhere you can interact with the AI publicly or asking, right?
Yeah.
So that's why you would need at some point maybe an interface in which you will interact with. Maybe it's a micro gesture, right? So maybe it's swiping with your thumb, or something that we have seen done by Meta. But please go ahead.
No, I mean, you're right, and it may be a naive. No, I mean, we like to touch things. We are built to touch, and we enjoy the materiality of the world. If you think about all the devices in the world, when we think of luxury and premium, we think of cars, we think of jewelry, clothing and so forth. And it's all about the material, the physicality of those. Even when we see devices being marketed to us, it's a spinning phone. Think of the amazing Johnny Ive early Apple sort of videos for the iPhone. It was all about the quality and the craft and the materiality of it. So we naturally, our desire is around those things. So I think that's not going to go away. And so we want to have that. So in some ways, if we can marry that enjoyment and innate need to touch and feel things with the power of AI, bypassing the little screen, then there is a nice, comfortable, exciting area to be in. It doesn't ethereal in floating around.
And when it comes to these, let's say, these initial experimentation that you did with spectacles, right? How was it, the integration with AI? How did you do it?
Some of it's faked, some of it is real. At the moment, I'm really, because there is a sort of API to sort of bring in an AI voice chat. So speech recognition is very easily built into that. And I now use natural language as a way of, instead of using buttons or key commands, I just set up a whole load of voice commands and use those as a form of interaction, which is just brilliant because it's just hands-free straight away, and you can just start doing that. And then I'm working on something now which can use their 3D model, Gen AI. So you show an image, generate 3D model. But a lot of the stuff I'm doing right now, I'm not needing to build all the sort of back end components. I understand what can be done. I'm more in unlocking how you and why you would do that. So it's the next phase is then to bring in engineers that are more sophisticated than me to then start to then build out those layers for me. I'm much more interested in the interaction right now.
So based on your current understanding and what you have tried, right? So on the tech side, what do you think is still needed to get this more widespread? And if not mass market, because it's going to still take a while, but to get broader acceptance that this is the direction that they should go to?
Yeah, I think it's sort of what I was saying before. It's the ability for much broader design community to be able to really take hold of this. It's too narrow at the moment, and it's where even I've been speaking to some of the sort of colleges in London. They need to bring together those design disciplines. We still have industrial design, we still have digital design, and we have interaction design, and we have sound design. We have all these sort of separate components. This really gives us the opportunity of having them working together. And I think until we find a workflow that allows that to happen, and that there is the learning curve really broken down. And I think, what we've got to do, it's trying to find that balance. And I think I sort of found it. I think that's how I've managed to sort of get quite far with my own prototyping, is that you're not having to completely change your tool set, but it's how you use it to the point. Well, it's just how you're plugging in those different tool sets to get to a more three-dimensional spatial form of output. Because if, as designers, you're learning stuff all the time, if you suddenly go, well, now I've got to learn Blender, or now I have to learn this big complex, that's these barriers that are stopping the broader community taking hold of it. I did a lot of talks around different architecture firms, and trying to sort of say, look, you need to sort of get hold of this technology, but because it's not part of their workflow and it's not part of their language around software, it's very difficult for them to go, well, okay, I'm going to build a team, or I'm going to get my architects to start looking at it.
And the problem is that maybe they feel they don't need that strong enough, because again, when you have the drive, I think there is enough, as we were saying before, there is enough tooling out there. Yes, it is not exactly what you're using daily. It is true. But you're also approaching a different type of technology, different interaction paradigms, and those tools cannot be the same. No. So there is a bit of a point there. It's like maybe they don't want it, or they don't feel they need it to a point that drives them to go through the barrier of learning a new tool.
Yeah, it is that. I often say to architects, you have a building that you've made and everything that's gone into that building. Currently, when people are walking through that building, the majority of the time, they're looking at their phone. They're either using their phone to interact with the building, or they're looking at their phone to, distracted through something. They're not looking at your amazing building. Now, there is going to be a time, not in the far distant future, when people are walking through with augmented glasses, so their heads are up and they're looking at your building. Now, wouldn't it be nice if the architect was part of the design language of what the augmentation was, so that it was an extension of that building and it was part of what the architects had designed, rather than a third party, a Meta or an advertising, a company doing that? Architects have created a virtual design language for their building. It becomes a really interesting thing, and that's not too far away, especially when you think of airports. You walk into an airport with augmented glasses on, there's a huge amount of functionality. It's the whole ecosystem. You've got parents with children, you've got shopping, you've got obviously signage and wayfinding. Wouldn't it be good if that building was designing those virtual layers as well? It's not, a separate thing.
And I would argue that certain places are even better suited than that. So, for example, if you think about a theme park or other places or a museum where that kind of technology could be immediately put on the heads of people for a part of the experience, that's where all the barrier, it's going to take ages before we get AR glasses. Well, I mean, you can already do what is a simple AR experience with the spectacles and have it part of your museum, but then it all revolves around objects that are in there and not necessarily the building, right? The architecture, the structure, and it's like patched on. It's not designed for, right?
Yeah.
And again, I think that this lowers even the barrier and makes all this transition closer than what we actually think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is, the time is now to really start exploring that, because also, the length of a building to be made, you're talking 15, 20 years. So, it's start designing for how people are going to be navigating your building now and what technology they're going to be using. This is the time to start doing it.
So, Orlando, what can we expect from you in upcoming months? And I encourage everybody to check out this LinkedIn is in the episode description. But what can we expect? What are you working on?
Well, I'm working with this haptics company right now, so there's going to be some really interesting set of use cases from this haptic technology, which is pretty cool. And I am developing, I've got another set of experiments coming out around my objects. So probably the time this will be released, I'll put that out. And then it's taking that to the level of actually making proper working publishable versions of those. So I'm now just setting that up now so I can actually start to put those out, because at the moment they're not published. They're not robust enough, and I don't have the sort of engineering behind it. So that would be the next stage, is to put those on. But constantly making these now. Yeah.
Awesome. Orlando, then thank you very much for being with us. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you so much. It was great talking to you and great questions.
Thank you very much for listening in. If you like the show, remember to leave a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or a thumbs up on YouTube. It really helps me keep doing this and shine the spotlights on the greatest founders and makers, pushing the boundaries of XR and AI. Also, make sure to check out the show page xraispotlight.com, where you can find more conversation like this one. Till next time.